My name is Rachel Bennett, and at 29, I never imagined I'd become the spark that lit a family feud. When my dear Grandma Lillian passed away last month after a long illness, I found out through a text my cousin sent by mistake that I'd been intentionally left out of the will reading. Even with a sinking feeling in my chest, I went anyway. "We've already divided everything," my Aunt Caroline said, her voice laced with smug satisfaction. "You weren't included for a reason." Then the attorney glanced down at the papers, his brow creased. "But the only name listed here is Rachel's." Silence swept through the room like a gust of cold air. If you've ever felt shut out by your own family, go ahead and hit subscribe and drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. Family conflict isn't rare, and mine took some turns no one saw coming. I grew up as the daughter of Grandma Lillian's youngest son, Daniel. Life wasn't always smooth, but my dad made sure it was full of love. He was considered the odd one out in the family, choosing to teach high school history instead of stepping into the family's financial firm. My mom, Laura, worked as a nurse. They raised me to focus on compassion and service, not chasing wealth. Every Sunday, we'd make our way to Grandma Lillian's old Victorian home in the heart of Charleston's historic quarter, a stunning place that had been in the family for generations. When I was 13, everything shifted. My dad died suddenly from an aneurysm, and my mom had a hard time holding everything together. That's when Grandma Lillian stepped forward without missing a beat. "Rachel will be staying with me part of the week," she told the family firmly. "That's not up for discussion." From then on, I split my time, some days in my mom's small apartment, and the rest at Grandma's, while my mom took on extra shifts just to keep us going. Grandma Lillian became more than just a grandparent. She was a second parent to me. "You're like I was, Rachel," she'd say as we sat together in her backyard among the hydrangeas. "You notice who people are, not what they have to offer." Those quiet moments and simple words shaped me more than she probably ever realized. She wasn't the kind of wealthy woman most people might picture. Lillian dressed plainly, spent her weekends serving meals at community kitchens, and gave to charities without making it known. The old family home was her only real indulgence, a place steeped in memories, not money. My Uncle Martin and Aunt Caroline never quite saw eye to eye with her. They lived in sleek new builds on the edge of town, drove imported cars, and were always trying to nudge Grandma into embracing a more fitting lifestyle for someone of her standing. So when I chose to become a nurse like my mother, focusing on hospice care no less, it completely baffled them. At Thanksgiving when I was 22, Uncle Martin pulled me aside in that half-condescending way of his. "You know, Rachel, you could be working at the firm. Why waste your potential on something with no future?" He swirled his glass of scotch and stared down at me like I'd lost my mind. "One call from your grandmother and you'd be set for life." I just looked at him and said calmly, "I'd rather build something on my own." My cousins, Lena and Carter, had both come out of elite business schools and were firmly planted in the company under their dad's wing. They couldn't understand my decision at all. Lena once asked me with complete sincerity, "But don't you want to be wealthy?" To them, the idea that someone might choose purpose over profit simply didn't compute. As Grandma Lillian moved into her mid-80s, her health gradually began to fade. I started stopping by twice a week, bringing her fresh groceries, making sure her medications were in order, and more often than not, just keeping her company. We'd bake together using her handwritten recipe cards, the same ones she taught me from when I was little. Her spice cookies were famous among the family, but I was the only one who knew the secret was just a pinch of black pepper. "You've got flour on your face." "Again," she'd chuckle, reaching over with a tissue to wipe my nose. Even though her body was growing frail, her mind stayed sharp, and she never lost her quick sense of humor. During those afternoons, she'd share stories about our family's past, things no one else ever seemed to ask about. She told me how her grandmother had been one of the earliest women to become a licensed physician in Vermont, how the original family wealth came from her grandfather's invention of a specialized loom used in textile production. They were stories about determination, setbacks, and grit, offering a real picture of our family's roots beyond the polished version shown at dinner parties. "Rachel," she told me one quiet afternoon, "money doesn't make someone valuable. Watch how people treat others when they think there's nothing in it for them. That's who they really are." While her condition became more difficult to manage, the rest of the family drifted in and out. Uncle Martin might stop by once a month, spending more time assessing the house's condition than talking with his mother. Aunt Caroline would show up with some pricey gift Grandma didn't need, then leave almost exactly an hour later. As for my cousins, they only made an appearance if a holiday meal was involved. The December before she passed, Grandma handed me a small wooden box. "This belonged to my mother," she said softly, placing it in my hands. Inside was a simple strand of pearls, understated, not worth much in dollars, but deeply meaningful. "It's beautiful," I told her, genuinely moved. "I want you to have it now," Grandma said firmly. "The rest of them would just see jewelry, but you'll understand that what matters is who wore it." I couldn't have imagined then that this small, personal gift would later be used against me. The last time we spoke, just a week before she passed, still stays with me. She was having one of her better days, sitting up by the window in her favorite chair. As I stood to leave, she reached out and held my hand with surprising strength. "Rachel," she said, her gray eyes focused and steady, "I've been paying attention to everyone for a long time. Just know this, I see it all. And soon, I'm going to set things right." At the time, I thought she was simply speaking about making peace as her life wound down. I had no idea she had something planned, something that would turn everything upside down. The first real crack in our family began about 3 years earlier, when Grandma was 86. Uncle Martin called for a family gathering at her house, supposedly to talk about long-term care arrangements. But when I arrived, I noticed more than just relatives. There was a real estate agent sitting in the living room. "We've been looking into selling the lake house," Uncle Martin announced, referring to our family's summer place up in Maine. It was where Grandma had spent nearly every summer since her childhood. "It's barely used now," he continued, "and keeping it running is getting too expensive." I looked over at Grandma. Her face gave little away, but I knew her well enough to recognize the subtle tension in her jaw. "Has she agreed to this?" I asked. Uncle Martin gave a dismissive wave. "Mom understands that it's the smart choice. She can't really enjoy it anymore, anyway." "Actually," I said, "we just talked last week about how she was hoping to spend a few weeks there this coming summer." The room fell completely silent. Aunt Caroline cleared her throat delicately. "Rachel, sweetheart, maybe you misunderstood," she said smoothly. "Your grandmother knows her own limits." But then Grandma Lillian spoke, her voice clear. "No, Rachel heard me right. I told her I don't want to sell the lake house. I meant what I said." The real estate agent stood awkwardly, mumbled an apology, and slipped out the front door. As soon as she was gone, Uncle Martin turned sharply toward me. "This is what you always do," he snapped. "You act like you know what's best just because you're around more, but you don't see the full picture, the financial side of it." I kept my voice calm. "What I see is that Grandma has the right to make her own choices about her home." Later that evening, after everyone had left, Uncle Martin cornered me in the kitchen. "Let me give you a word of advice," he said in a low voice. "You might think you're important to her, but don't overstep. Just remember who built this family's fortune, and it wasn't your father." The remark cut deep. My father's name had always been used to measure what he wasn't, but I didn't flinch. "This isn't about money, Uncle Martin. It's about honoring Grandma's decisions." From that moment on, he began what felt like a quiet campaign against me. It started subtly, little remarks to relatives suggesting I was manipulating her, implying I was trying to secure a place in the will. By the time Christmas rolled around that year, it was obvious things had shifted. Members of the extended family who had always been warm toward me had grown cold. At dinner, Aunt Caroline conveniently left me out of the group family photo. Lena made a remark about people chasing legacies while staring straight at me. Even my mom's sister, Aunt Diane, who had always treated me with kindness, seemed withdrawn and guarded. After the meal, I happened to overhear Uncle Martin speaking quietly with Carter in the hallway. "We need to protect Lillian from Rachel's influence," I overheard Uncle Martin saying. "She's got her completely under her thumb, and who knows what she's convincing her to do with the estate." I didn't want to let those accusations fester unchallenged. I wrote emails to my aunts and uncles, explaining clearly that I had no interest in Grandma's finances, that all I wanted was for her final years to be peaceful on her own terms. The responses were lukewarm, at best. Aunt Caroline replied with a curt, "We all want what's best for your grandmother." The rest didn't respond at all. That spring, the family hosted an Easter get-together at Uncle Martin's house. I wasn't invited. I only found out when Lena posted photos online. In one of them, Grandma Lillian sat off to the side, looking tired and disoriented. I called her that evening. "Did you enjoy Easter with everyone?" I asked gently. "It was fine," she said, then lowered her voice a little. "But they didn't make the deviled eggs the way I like, and Martin's house is always chilly." "I wish I'd been there," I told her. There was a pause. "You weren't invited?" she asked, clearly surprised. The tone in her voice told me everything. I hadn't been left out by her. She didn't even know I was excluded. As her condition worsened, the family began making it harder for me to spend time with her. Aunt Caroline set up a formal schedule that limited my visits to just 2 hours on Sunday afternoons, saying it was to avoid tiring her out. But whenever I arrived, it wasn't long before a cousin or another relative just happened to show up, making any personal conversation with Grandma impossible. Still, I found quiet ways to stay close. On my days off from the hospice center, I'd bring lunch and share it with her. Her caregiver, Maria, who genuinely cared for Grandma, helped make those moments possible. Sometimes Maria would call me directly if she thought Grandma could use some company or if she happened to be having a particularly good day. That final Christmas before she passed, I wasn't invited to the family gathering at all. Aunt Caroline sent a short message. "We're keeping things small this year. Your grandmother needs her rest." Later, Maria quietly told me that small actually meant the entire family was there, just not me. So, on Christmas Eve, I left a gift with Maria to bring to Grandma. A tin of her favorite spice cookies we used to bake together, a soft shawl in that pale blue she loved, and a photo album I'd made with snapshots from the lake house spanning across the years. When Grandma Lillian passed away that April, I didn't hear it from any family member. It was Maria who called, crying, from the house. By the time I arrived, Uncle Martin and Aunt Caroline were already there, speaking with the funeral director about the arrangements. "Rachel," Aunt Caroline said with an overly sweet tone when she saw me. "We were just about to call you, of course." The funeral itself felt more like a performance than a farewell. I was seated in the third row, behind distant relatives who hadn't seen Grandma more than a handful of times in the past decade. No one asked me to speak, despite the fact that I'd spent more time with her in recent years than anyone else in that room. Uncle Martin gave the eulogy. He spent most of it praising Grandma's late husband, his business achievements, and the foundation he supposedly laid for the family's success. Through all of it, Grandma's heart, her values, and her quiet strength were barely mentioned. I kept replaying what Grandma had told me, that she planned to make things right. I hadn't realized just how significant those words would become. 2 weeks after the funeral, I was making dinner in my small apartment when my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Lena, clearly meant for a group chat, but accidentally sent to me. Meeting tomorrow at Harold's office, 2 p.m. Mom says not to tell Rachel. I froze, my stomach tightening. A minute later, another text came through. Oops, wrong thread, just ignore that. I sat down at the table, a cold numbness spreading through me. So this was it. They weren't just excluding me from gatherings anymore. They were planning to leave me out of the will reading altogether. Whatever Grandma might have left behind, they intended to shut me out entirely. I stayed up that night thinking it through. A part of me wanted to take the high road, to stay out of the drama. I had never cared about Grandma's estate. What we shared wasn't tied to anything financial. It was real, and it was enough. But another part of me, quieter but steady, knew Grandma would have wanted me to be there. Even if there was nothing for me, I had a right to hear her final wishes. That alone mattered. By morning, I'd made my choice. I called in and took the day off, something I almost never did. I picked out a simple navy dress, the same one Grandma once told me brought out the color in my eyes. Grandma always said the dress looked polished, professional, never flashy. That was exactly the impression I wanted to give. I wasn't showing up for money. I was showing up out of respect. As I drove toward the law office in downtown Charleston, my hands trembled slightly on the wheel. I kept running through scenarios in my head. What I might say, how I'd stay calm during the confrontation I was certain would come. In the parking lot, I sat in the car for a few minutes, gathering my resolve. I could almost hear Grandma's voice in my head. Stand tall, Rachel. You belong anywhere I wanted you to be. The offices of Harold and Benton took up the top floor of a stately old brick building. When the elevator doors slid open, I saw them instantly. Uncle Martin and Aunt Caroline, Lena and Carter, Aunt Diane and her husband Ron, even Cousin Theo, who hadn't spoken to Grandma since I was a teenager. They were huddled near the reception area, speaking in hushed tones. Aunt Caroline spotted me first. Her expression froze mid-sentence, then shifted into thinly veiled disapproval. Rachel, she said, raising her voice so everyone turned to look. What exactly are you doing here? I raised my chin just slightly. I'm here for Grandma Lillian's will reading. Uncle Martin stepped forward and stopped in front of me as if to block my way. You weren't invited. This is for family. I am family, I said quietly. You know what he means, someone muttered behind him. Lena cut in sharply. Family who actually respected Grandma's wishes, who didn't try to sway her decisions. Before I could reply, a door opened at the end of the hall, and an older gentleman stepped out, neatly dressed, silver-haired, with a calm and kind demeanor. Is everyone here for the Lillian Bennett estate? He asked, then paused as he sensed the tension in the room. Is there an issue? Aunt Caroline quickly stepped forward wearing her most pleasant smile. Mr. Harold, there seems to have been a bit of confusion. Rachel wasn't meant to be included in today's reading. Mr. Harold raised an eyebrow. Ms. Rachel Bennett? Lillian's granddaughter? That's me, I said quietly. He checked the papers on his clipboard. Then yes, you're absolutely supposed to be here. Please, everyone come in. The conference room was refined but understated, with a long mahogany table and high-backed leather chairs. I chose a seat near the door, aware of every stare directed at me. Whispers floated around the room. She must have found out somehow. Martin's going to lose it, especially after the lake house fiasco. Mr. Harold cleared his throat, signaling the beginning. Before we start, I should say I wasn't just Lillian's legal advisor. I was also her friend for over 3 decades. She gave very clear instructions, and I will be following them exactly. He reached for a folder, but Aunt Caroline interrupted again. Mr. Harold, if I may, we should explain the situation with Rachel. We didn't invite her because we've already handled the distribution of most of the estate. She gave me a quick, dismissive glance. We didn't want to waste your time. Heat crept up my neck as all eyes shifted toward me again. "We've already divided everything," she declared firmly. "There was a reason she wasn't included." Mr. Harold's brow furrowed. He looked genuinely confused. "I'm afraid there's been a significant misunderstanding, Mrs. Langford. Nothing should have been distributed yet." Then he looked directly at me. "And regarding Ms. Rachel Bennett not being invited..." He opened the folder and adjusted his glasses. "That would be highly irregular, given what the will contains." Uncle Martin stood up abruptly. "What are you talking about?" Mr. Harold glanced up, his expression professional, but there was something in his eyes that almost resembled quiet satisfaction. "I mean," he said calmly, "her name is the only one listed in the will." The room froze. For a moment, it felt as though the air had been completely drained, and no one could move or speak. "That's not possible," Uncle Martin finally blurted out. "There has to be a mistake." "I can assure you there isn't," Mr. Harold replied firmly, his voice carrying the weight of certainty. "And I think the best thing would be for me to read Lillian's will, just as she intended." He placed his reading glasses on and began, steady and clear. "I, Lillian May Bennett, being of sound mind and memory, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils." The formal phrasing continued for a moment, but all I could do was wait, knowing the most important part was still to come. "After much thought and close observation of my family over the years," Mr. Harold read, "I have reached a conclusion regarding the division of my estate. I hereby leave all my property, both real and personal, including but not limited to my primary residence at 112 Crestwood Lane, my summer home on Lake Morrow, all bank accounts, investments, belongings, and family keepsakes, to my granddaughter, Rachel Elaine Bennett." There was a sharp gasp across the room. Lena dropped her glass of water, and it shattered loudly against the hardwood floor. No one made a move to pick it up. "This has to be illegal," Uncle Martin said, his face flushed deep red. Mr. Harold didn't pause. He continued reading with quiet authority. "There is a personal letter included, which I've been instructed to deliver privately to Ms. Bennett. However, I wish to state clearly that this decision was made with intention, clarity, and great care." He glanced up from the will. "There's more, of course, but perhaps we should address any immediate questions first." Aunt Caroline had begun to cry now, black streaks trailing down her cheeks. "After all we did for her," she said shakily. "The doctor visits, the holiday dinners, helping her maintain her reputation while she insisted on mingling with those charity workers." Carter leaned in across the table. "We'll fight this. She wasn't in her right mind." Mr. Harold shook his head calmly. "I would strongly advise against that. Lillian anticipated your concerns and took extensive steps to confirm her mental soundness. She underwent full neurological evaluations with 3 independent specialists in the final months of her life. All concluded she was completely capable of making legal decisions." As the truth settled over the room like a heavy fog, I heard her words in my memory again. "I've been watching all of you for years." She hadn't been speaking idly. She had been paying attention, carefully noting how each of us behaved when we thought there was nothing to be gained. Mr. Harold reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Rachel," he said, "your grandmother asked me to give this to you in private. But under the circumstances, you may choose to share parts of it if you feel it's appropriate." With slightly trembling hands, I broke the seal and opened the letter, reading silently. "My dearest Rachel, if you're reading this, I've moved on to whatever comes next, and you've just learned that you are my sole heir. I imagine the rest of the family isn't reacting well. For years, I watched closely. Martin only ever visited when he wanted to talk about streamlining my assets. Caroline brought expensive gifts, but she never stayed long enough to hold a real conversation. The grandkids, except you only reached out for birthdays or holidays. But you, Rachel, you visited because you wanted to. You listened to my stories, baked my old recipes, and treated me like a person, not like a vault waiting to be opened. Over the past few years, I've been running a quiet test. I casually mentioned certain valuables around different relatives, just to see how they'd respond. I paid attention to who asked about my health and who asked about my finances. I saw clearly who helped out of care and who helped out of obligation. You were the only one who never failed. With love and full trust in you, Grandma Lillian. I looked up from the letter, my cheeks wet with tears, and the room around me was unraveling. Uncle Martin was already on his phone, likely contacting a lawyer. Aunt Caroline was loudly accusing Mr. Harold of allowing me to manipulate Grandma. Lena was crying, loudly and dramatically. Carter sat motionless, staring off, expression blank. Mr. Harold raised his voice over the noise. "There's something else you all need to know," he said firmly. Lillian didn't just leave instructions, she documented everything. He pulled open a second folder. She kept a detailed record of visits, conversations, behavior. 2 years ago, she had a home security system installed, which tracked entries and exits. She saved emails and texts. And yes, she recorded certain conversations which, under South Carolina law, is legal if one party consents. He adjusted his glasses. She also became aware that certain items had been removed from her home without her permission. So, she created an itemized inventory with photographs of everything she owned. "That's absurd," Aunt Caroline scoffed, but her voice was shaky. "Is it?" Mr. Harold replied, raising an eyebrow. "Then perhaps you can explain why the Tiffany lamp from her study now sits in your living room, or why Lillian's diamond tennis bracelet appeared on Lena's wrist at a charity gala last month, or how the paintings from the lake house were photographed in Martin's office." The color drained from their faces. "There's a clause in the will," he continued. "Any items taken from Lillian's homes must be returned within 30 days. Failure to do so will result in legal consequences." That's when Uncle Martin erupted. "This is your fault," he shouted, pointing at me with a trembling hand. "You filled her head with lies. You turned her against her own family." I thought of all those quiet Sundays I'd spent by Grandma's side, talking about books, her childhood, our family's stories. I remembered driving her to medical appointments when no one else would rearrange their schedule. And I thought of the smile on her face when I surprised her with butter pecan ice cream, just because it was Tuesday. "No, Uncle Martin," I said softly. She knew exactly what she was doing. She always did. The following weeks were nothing short of exhausting. I left Mr. Harold's office that day with Grandma's letter pressed tightly to my chest, and the sound of my relative's anger trailing behind me. Uncle Martin's final words as I walked out the door were, "This isn't over." Not by a long shot. He meant it. The very next morning, the calls started, before the sun had even come up. First Aunt Caroline, then Lena, then relatives I barely remembered. All of them demanding answers, throwing accusations, or trying to barter for things they believed were rightfully theirs. I stopped answering any number I didn't recognize, but the voicemails kept piling up. "Rachel, this is your Aunt Caroline. You know what the right thing is here. Your grandmother wasn't thinking straight. Let's not make this ugly. Call me." "Hey, it's Carter. Look, I know we haven't really talked much, but Grandma told me that silver set was mine years ago. I still have the email she sent. I can forward it to you." "Rachel, this is Uncle Martin. My attorney will be in touch. What you've done is disgraceful, and it won't hold up in court." By the end of the week, the backlash had spilled onto the internet. Lena posted a cryptic message on her social feed. Funny how some people fake being family-focused just to get their hands on something. True character always shows. Then came messages from distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Some scolded me. Others suddenly wanted to reconnect, now that I had something they cared about. I changed my phone number I locked down every account I had. But the stress crept in quietly and began to weigh me down. I couldn't sleep. I had constant tension headaches. At the hospice center, my manager noticed something was off. I was making small mistakes, things I would never have missed before. "Rachel, is everything okay?" she asked gently after I forgot to update a patient's chart. "This isn't like you." That's when I broke down and told her everything. She didn't hesitate. "You need a break," she said softly. "Your patients deserve your full attention. Take a week. Handle what you need to handle." So I did. During that time, I finally returned to Grandma's house, my house now, according to the will. I used the same key I'd carried for years and stepped into the quiet. The air still held a faint trace of her perfume. But something was off. The house felt empty in a way that had nothing to do with her absence. There were gaps, noticeable, deliberate ones, on shelves and walls. As I walked through the rooms, I began to understand just how much had already been taken. The antique clock from the front hallway, gone. The delicate crystal figurines Grandma had spent decades collecting, vanished. Her jewelry box sat nearly empty. But it wasn't just the valuables. That's what hit hardest. The hand-knit blanket her mother made, the worn recipe book with her notes scribbled in the margins, the souvenir spoon rack from her road trips with Grandpa. All of it. Missing. I made it to her bedroom, where the quilt she'd always kept folded at the foot of the bed was no longer there. I sat down on the edge of the stripped mattress, and the grief finally broke through. I cried until there was nothing left. It wasn't about the money. It was the sense that her presence had been wiped away, the quiet theft of memories I'd hoped to keep close. In the back of her closet, behind some old coats, I discovered a small safe I'd never noticed before. After trying a few combinations that might have mattered to her, I finally entered her birthday. The lock clicked open. Inside was a leather-bound journal, a few labeled USB drives, and a handwritten note that simply read, "For Rachel, use if needed." The journal was astonishing. She had chronicled everything: visits, conversations, borrowed items never returned. Grandma had quietly built a meticulous record of the family's behavior over the years, creating evidence that would be hard, if not impossible, to refute. The USB drives held even more: email backups, photos of her belongings, even audio clips. One journal entry from about 6 months before her passing stood out. "Martin came by today, spent 10 minutes asking how I'm feeling, then launched into another pitch about simplifying the estate by selling the lake house. When I said no, he became agitated, called me unreasonable for holding on to a depreciating property. What he doesn't realize is I had it appraised last month. It's worth nearly twice what Harold and I paid. Martin's never understood the difference between cost and value." Another entry was even more unsettling. "Caroline brought Lena over for a casual visit. While Caroline chatted with me in the living room, Lena disappeared upstairs for nearly 20 minutes. After they left, I checked my jewelry box. As I suspected, the tennis bracelet is gone. I updated the inventory and took new photos of the space where it was kept. I wonder if they realize the upstairs hallway has cameras now. With this mountain of evidence in hand, I reached out to Mr. Harold again. "I need to take action," I told him. "They've already taken so much." "Lillian prepared for this," he said seriously. "She was incredibly careful. I'll connect you with an attorney who handles contested estates and asset recovery." He referred me to Sarah Donovan, a litigation attorney known for being tenacious. She was in her early 50s, with a sharp mind and a reputation for being direct. After reviewing everything Grandma had compiled, she looked at me and said, "This is one of the most thoroughly documented estate cases I've ever handled. Your grandmother was exceptionally precise." Sarah wasted no time. She began issuing cease and desist letters to every relative known to have taken something from the house. But the legal action only poured fuel on the fire. Uncle Martin, as promised, filed a lawsuit to challenge the will, claiming Grandma had been manipulated and wasn't mentally competent. Aunt Caroline took things further, calling my workplace, contacting people at the hospice center where I worked, hinting that I had neglected patients in order to spend time influencing my grandmother. One afternoon, the center's director called me into her office. "Rachel, I know these accusations aren't based in truth," my supervisor said gently, "but they're becoming disruptive. A few patient families have reached out after receiving calls from your aunt." My professional reputation, something I had built slowly and steadily over years of compassionate care, was being chipped away. The stress became overwhelming. I couldn't sleep, and I started experiencing panic attacks. My doctor put me on anxiety medication and strongly encouraged me to begin therapy. "This kind of physical response is completely understandable," she explained. "Prolonged family conflict like this creates real emotional trauma." Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, I received an email from a local reporter asking for a statement on the Bennett estate dispute, calling it a legal fight tearing apart one of Charleston's oldest families. Somehow it had reached the media. That night, I sat in my apartment with the lights off and the curtains closed, feeling completely defeated. For the first time, I seriously considered walking away, signing everything over just to make the pain stop. I reached for Grandma's letter, needing something, anything to hold on to. As I read it again, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Rachel, it's Maria, your grandmother's home aide. I still have a few things she wanted you to have. Personal items. She asked me to keep them safe. Can we meet?" The next day, we met outside a small cafe. Maria handed me a box, worn at the edges, but carefully taped. She made me promise to keep these separate from everything else. Said you'd know what to do with them when the time came. Inside the box were several memory cards and a small digital recorder. I inserted the first card into my laptop. Dozens of video files appeared, each labeled by date. In the very first clip, recorded nearly a year before she passed, Grandma Lillian sat in her favorite armchair, looking directly at the camera. Her eyes were steady, clear. "My name is Lillian May Bennett. Today is September 15th, and I am recording this by my own decision and in full mental clarity, as confirmed by Mr. Harold." The camera panned briefly to show Mr. Harold sitting nearby. He nodded and gave his name and the date. "I want to explain my decisions regarding my will," she continued. "For years, I've quietly watched how my family behaves. I've tested their intentions, and I've made my choices based on what I've seen." She spoke with confidence and calm. In each video that followed, she described specific events with dates and names, laying out exactly what had led her to entrust everything to me. Her voice didn't waver. Her mind was sharp. There was no room for anyone to question whether she had been pressured or confused. As I watched one video after another, a deep sense of peace settled over me. She hadn't just given me her belongings. She had given me the tools to protect her legacy. She knew exactly what would happen, and she had prepared for it all. In the last video, recorded just weeks before she passed, Grandma looked more fragile, but her eyes still shone with fierce resolve. "Rachel, if you're watching this, then things have gotten hard, just like I thought they might," she said. "Remember what I always told you about standing up for yourself? Sometimes kindness means having the strength to set boundaries. I didn't raise you to be a doormat, my dear. I raised you to be just like me. And I never let anyone take advantage of me." For the first time since the will reading, I felt a flicker of the old strength returning. Grandma had entrusted me not only with her belongings, but with her entire legacy. I couldn't let her down. The next morning, I called Sarah Donovan. "There's something you need to see," I said, bringing all the videos and recordings to her office. After watching them, she leaned back with the first genuine smile I'd seen. "This changes everything. Your grandmother didn't just prepare a case, she built a fortress." With that new evidence, we crafted a comprehensive plan. First, we submitted a detailed inventory of every missing item to the probate court, complete with photos and proof of where those items currently were. Next, formal legal demands were sent out for the immediate return of each possession, with a strict deadline attached. At the same time, Sarah filed a motion to dismiss Uncle Martin's lawsuit contesting the will, including Grandma's videos as key exhibits. "No judge in the state is going to rule against your grandmother after seeing this," she assured me. We also contacted the hospice center's legal counsel, providing evidence that the allegations against me were part of a deliberate harassment campaign. They promptly issued cease and desist letters to my relatives, warning them of legal consequences if the defamatory calls didn't stop. For added support, we kept in close touch with the center's team to monitor the situation. I reached out to several nurses and aides who had cared for Grandma during her final months. They were more than willing to provide affidavits confirming how often I visited compared to the rest of the family. "You were there at least twice a week," Nurse Daniels confirmed. "Sometimes your uncle wouldn't show up for a month straight, and when he did, he spent most of the visit glued to his phone." Maria handed over a detailed calendar she'd kept, tracking every visitor. It showed I had come to see Grandma 64 times in her last year, while Uncle Martin had visited only 7 times, and Aunt Caroline 9. My cousins stopped by only during holidays. We also uncovered financial documents revealing that Uncle Martin had borrowed significant sums from Grandma over the years without paying them back. Meanwhile, Aunt Caroline had charged multiple personal expenses to Grandma's accounts, disguising them as caregiving costs. With this mountain of evidence, Sarah recommended calling a family meeting at her office. "Sometimes laying all your cards on the table at once can save months of drawn-out litigation," she explained. The day of the meeting, I arrived early, my nerves twisting in knots despite the strength of our case. One by one, they filed in. Uncle Martin, accompanied by a lawyer who nervously glanced at his watch. Aunt Caroline, who avoided meeting my eyes. And cousins Lena and Carter, both wearing forced expressions that couldn't quite mask their unease. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah began as everyone settled in. "We've called this meeting to address some outstanding issues regarding Lillian Bennett's estate." Uncle Martin's lawyer wasted no time, launching into a rehearsed statement about serious concerns of undue influence and doubts about Grandma's mental capacity when she made her will. Sarah let him speak without interruption, then responded calmly. "Before we move any further, there are some materials I believe everyone here needs to see." She pressed a button on a remote, and the large screen on the wall flickered to life, revealing Grandma Lillian's face. "My name is Lillian May Bennett," her clear voice echoed through the room. "Today is September 15th, and I am recording this of my own free will." As the video played, I watched my family's expressions shift. Uncle Martin's face turned pale. Aunt Caroline's hand flew to her mouth in shock. Lena began quietly sobbing. When the video ended, Sarah spoke simply. "There are 17 more videos like this, each one addressing specific events and decisions. Lillian Bennett may be the most meticulous client I've ever had," she said. Then the screen switched to a spreadsheet. "This is the current inventory of items removed from Lillian's properties without permission. Next to each entry, you'll find the item's location, proof of its removal, and an estimated value for insurance purposes. The total currently exceeds $450,000. The room fell utterly silent. "Ms. Bennett is prepared to file criminal charges for theft if these items are not returned within 7 days, Sarah continued, her voice steady. "Additionally, we have evidence of financial exploitation that may be of interest to the district attorney." The attorney for Uncle Martin leaned over and whispered something urgently in his ear. After a moment, Uncle Martin cleared his throat. "Perhaps we have all been a bit hasty," he said quietly. "Emotions run high after a loss like this, especially when money is involved." I couldn't resist adding that the meeting ended with Uncle Martin's lawyer asking for time to review the evidence and advise his client. 2 days later, he called Sarah to say they would be withdrawing their lawsuit contesting the will within the week. Slowly, items started showing up on Grandma's porch, delivered by moving companies. The jewelry wasn't returned in person, It came back through couriers, each piece carefully wrapped. No notes, no apologies, but at least they were complying. I hadn't expected to hear from any of them directly, so I was caught off guard when Aunt Caroline called me herself. "Rachel," she said, her voice softer than usual, lacking its typical sharpness. "Hi." "We didn't realize how much these past years meant to Grandma. You never asked." I kept my response simple. There was a long pause. "We thought you were taking advantage of her. We couldn't understand why she preferred your company so much." "Because I saw her as a person, not a ledger," I answered quietly. Another pause followed. "Some of us want to talk, to explain, maybe even apologize." I thought about her words. "I'm willing to listen," I said, "but I need time." After we hung up, I sat in Grandma's living room, truly mine now, surrounded by the returned possessions that carried her memory. The victories of the past weeks felt bittersweet. I had the house, the belongings, the legal proof, but in the process, I'd lost the rest of my family. The next day, I took action. I called each family member one by one, offering them the chance to choose a sentimental item from Grandma's things. Not the most valuable, but something meaningful to remember her by. Some declined. Still too proud or too angry to accept, but Lena surprised me by asking for Grandma's old recipe book. "She taught me how to make snickerdoodles once," she admitted softly. "It's one of the few good memories I have with her." Carter asked for Grandpa's fishing tackle box from the lake house. "He took me fishing a few times when I was really little," he said quietly, "before everything got so complicated." Uncle Martin predictably refused my offer, but Aunt Caroline requested one of Grandma's watercolor paintings, a simple lakeside landscape at sunset. "She painted it the summer before she married your grandfather," she told me. "I always admired it." These small gestures didn't mend the deep wounds that had been caused, but they were a beginning, a recognition that Grandma was more than her wealth. She was a person who had touched each of us in different ways. The court officially closed the case the following month, confirming me as the sole heir and legal owner of all Grandma's properties and possessions. It was a complete victory, though complicated by the knowledge that some relationships could never be repaired. As I stood on the porch of Grandma's house, my house now, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I thought about how she might feel about everything that had unfolded. The bitterness, the accusations, the greed, but also the final honoring of her wishes. "You did good, Grandma," I whispered into the evening air. "You saw us all clearly, even when we couldn't see ourselves." 6 months after the reading that changed everything, I found myself sitting in Grandma Lillian's garden, now my garden, watching bees drift lazily among the lavender bushes she had planted years ago. The property had changed in subtle ways. I'd preserved the warmth and character she nurtured, while adding touches that reflected my own style. New bookshelves in the study, a small meditation nook in the sunroom. Wind chimes swayed gently from the porch ceiling. The house no longer carried the weight of conflict. It had become a refuge again, just as it had been during my childhood visits. I had taken a leave of absence from the hospice center to focus on settling the estate and figuring out what came next. The inheritance had opened doors I'd never thought possible, but it came with responsibilities too. I was still learning how to navigate them. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through Grandma's desk, I discovered an envelope I'd somehow overlooked before. It was simply addressed to Rachel. After everything had been settled, inside was a handwritten letter on Grandma's distinctive stationery. "My dearest Rachel, if you're reading this, then the storm has passed. And knowing our family, that storm was probably a Category 5 hurricane. But I have absolute faith in your strength and resilience. There's something I need to explain, something I couldn't include in my official documents. This inheritance was never about punishing the others, though I'm sure that's how they saw it. It was about recognizing the heart that beats so fiercely in you. The same heart my Harold had. The same heart your father Daniel carried. Money changes people, Rachel. I've seen it time and again. It can bring out selfishness, entitlement, cruelty. But every so often, very rarely, it finds someone who understands its true purpose, to provide security that allows generosity. I chose you, not because you were perfect or because you never disappointed me. I chose you because when you made mistakes, you took responsibility. Because when you disagreed with me, you did so with respect. Because when you helped me, you expected nothing in return. The others will say I was manipulated or confused, but the truth is much simpler. I wanted my legacy entrusted to someone who would honor its meaning, not just protect its worth. Now, some advice from beyond the grave. Don't let this inheritance change who you are. Use it to become even more truly yourself. Take that trip to Italy we always dreamed about. Fund the pediatric hospice program you hope to start. Keep the lake house in the family. Someday you may have children who will cherish it as we did. And when enough time has passed, find ways to include the family again. Not because they've earned it, but because connection is what truly matters. Set boundaries. I wasn't raised to be a pushover, and neither were you. But leave space for healing and forgiveness. I love you, my dear girl. I'm so proud of the woman you've become. Grandma Lillian's words brought tears to my eyes as I read and reread them. Still do. She was guiding me, offering wisdom and the courage to carve my own way forward. In the weeks that followed, I put her advice into action. I established the Lillian Bennett Memorial Scholarship at the nursing school I attended, reserved for students pursuing hospice and palliative care. I began the process of creating a foundation to support elderly individuals without family, people who, unlike Grandma, had no one to stand up for them in their final years. And yes, I finally took that trip to Italy, visiting the quiet village in Tuscany where Grandma's parents had been born. Walking the same cobblestone streets that my ancestors had walked, I felt a connection to my past that went beyond the recent family turmoil. As for the family, healing came in small, unexpected ways. Lena was the first to reach out, asking if we could meet for coffee. She brought photos of her newborn daughter, whom she had named Lillian. I want her to know the real family stories, Lena said hesitantly, not just the polished versions we share at fundraisers. Would you be willing to share some of your memories with her someday? Carter invited me to his wedding, though I suspected his fiancée had insisted on it. Still, when I attended, he made a point of introducing me to everyone as my cousin who runs the Lillian Bennett Foundation. It wasn't warm, but it was acknowledgement. Aunt Caroline stayed distant, but sent a Christmas card with a brief note. Your grandmother would be proud of what you're doing with the foundation. Coming from her, it felt almost like an olive branch. Uncle Martin never came around. Some wounds are too deep, some pride too rigid to soften. I accepted that, though I left the door open, if he ever chose to change his mind. The greatest healing came through an unexpected connection at one of the foundation's events. I met Grandma's nephew, Lucas, my father Daniel's cousin, who had moved to California decades ago. He'd lost touch with much of the family, but held fond memories of both Grandma and my father. Daniel was the best of us, Lucas told me over dinner. He chose teaching over money, meaning over status. Lillian loved him for living authentically. Through Lucas, I discovered a branch of the family untouched by the inheritance dispute. Second and third cousins who shared stories and photos I'd never seen before. It expanded my understanding of our family history, beyond the narrow story I had grown up with. 1 year after Grandma's passing, I hosted a memorial dinner at the house. I invited only those who had truly cared for her, Maria and the other caregivers, Mr. Harold, a few neighbors who had been genuine friends, Lucas and his family, and yes, even Lena with her baby Lillian. We shared stories, laughter, and a few tears, creating the kind of gathering Grandma would have cherished. As everyone mingled in the garden afterward, Mr. Harold came up to me, holding a glass of Grandma's favorite sherry. You know, he said quietly, I've managed hundreds of estates in my career. seen families torn apart, relationships broken over far less than what was at stake here. I'm not sure our family did much better, I admitted. He shook his head gently. You misunderstand me. The real miracle isn't that some relationships survived. It's that you stayed true to yourself through it all. Eleanor once told me her greatest achievement wasn't her wealth or status, but raising a son who valued integrity enough to pass it on to his daughter. I glanced around at the gathering. Not the family I had expected, but a chosen family, bound by genuine love and respect for Grandma Lillian. On the mantel inside, her photograph watched over us all. Her faint smile seemed to say she'd known exactly how everything would unfold. The inheritance had cost me relationships, but it gave me something far more precious: the freedom to live by my own values, just as my father had, just as Grandma had taught me. I realized then that this had been her true legacy. Not the house, not the money, but the strength to be myself, the courage to stand firm in my own truth. As the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, I stood on the porch watching the fireflies flicker in the summer twilight. "We did it, Grandma," I whispered softly. "We made things right." Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against family expectations or pressure? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If my story touched you, please subscribe to hear more about family challenges, unexpected inheritances, and discovering strength in hard times. Remember, sometimes the most precious inheritance isn't counted in dollars. It's the lessons learned and the love we carry forward. Thank you for listening to my story today. May you always have the courage to live your truth, just as my Grandma Lillian taught me.